Hi, I'm Stu Kagan, and welcome to Born Scrappy, the podcast for scrap metal exporters and traders. Join me in conversation with some of the most experienced traders and operators that have helped shape this incredible industry. In today's episode, I chat with Jim Skipsey. Jim is the Senior Vice President of Cormet Trading and was previously with CMC and the Commercial Director at Alpert and Alpert. So let's hear from Jim. But first, intro. Hey, Jim, how are you?
Stu, how are you?
Yeah, I'm very good. Thanks, man. Excited to have you on Born Scrappy.
Thank you.
So, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Pleasure.
Jim, tell us a little bit how you found yourself in the metal recycling trading industry.
Well, I guess it probably started, it definitely started straight out of college in Dallas, Commercial Metals Company in their Dallas trading division. They were looking for new traders to kind of help develop their South American business. And because I was born and raised in Mexico, grew up in Mexico speaking Spanish, it was interesting to them. So, and for me, I was always interested in international business. So I went to work for them, which was great. I mean, it was a great introduction to the industry because, CMC is one of the best companies in the world in this industry. And they spent a lot of time and energy in training us. For the first 6 months, we would spend 6 weeks in their scrap processing yard, then another 6 weeks in their steel mill, then another 6 weeks in their traffic department. So we really got a well-rounded introduction to the industry. And then I went on to basically work for their Dallas trading division in the aluminum side, where we were marketing and trading aluminum semi-finished products throughout Latin America. And that's also when where I got a little bit exposure into the scrap side, because, when we were down there selling coils or selling semi-finished products, we would come across whether it was class scrap or whether it was other types of scrap. And it really was fascinating for me because I just loved everything about the scrap side. The people were, very interesting. And so I started focusing a little bit more time on that side of the business, where I was buying mixed containers from Central America and bringing them into CMC scrap yards in Florida or in Texas and whatever else. So that was kind of my first taste of the scrap side, and it was great. I loved it. Then in 1999, I got an opportunity to transfer to their New York office, their coal metals division, where they focus more on trading and distributing minerals, ferroalloys, and break bulk shipments. So that kind of opened my eyes into a totally different part of the business, which was, they got into chartering vessels and selling various different products from China into either aluminum manufacturers or the chemical industry. And it was fantastic. It was great. Then I would say in early 2000s, right at the start of the dot-com boom, I got an opportunity to join a startup company that was dedicated to our industry, and they wanted to be the first to the market B2B. Basically it was the platform for trading. And even though the name was aluminium.com, they were focusing on all types of products, whether it was copper, semi-finished products, and it was an amazing experience. I got to really be part of a startup company that was very well funded. Part of that big dot-com boom, which was very exciting. It brought a whole new level of perspective to the industry, and it really opened up the doors to all types of customers, to suppliers. Because we were one of the first to the industry, we had close to 2,000 companies registered, and everybody at that time was very interested in learning, what's it all about, not necessarily looking to jump on the platform, but more just trying to understand, what direction this industry was going. So it really kind of introduced me to a lot of different people in the business, whether it was on the consumer side in the US, especially because I didn't have a lot of experience with the consumers in the US. It was more the international side. But and then I also met tons of suppliers all over the world that were interested in learning how to either market their metal online or meet consumers, and it was just great. It was now at the same time, people were very skeptical, naturally, especially in our industry where it's on the scrap side and family-owned businesses, they want to kind of keep things, confidential, and at that time, people were very nervous about the information on the internet, what to put out there, whether it was, I mean, I'm speculating, but whether, tax purposes or whatever it is, they just didn't want to
Yeah, of
publish
course.
a lot of information and they didn't have a lot of trust in it. So the tech,
I mean, we're talking over 20
right,
years ago, right?
exactly. Technology
It's
was the
yeah, it's a different
technology
world.
was incredible. I mean, it was literally you could
Mm.
transact online, with people all over the world. So the technology side was great. It took a lot to really kind of get people motivated to transact online. So unfortunately, it didn't last. So in early 2000s, it kind of went under, and then 9/11 hit. So I basically had to leave New York just because it was not a good time to be there. So I moved back to California where my parents are, and I took a year off from the business. I worked with my dad in the restaurant bar business, which he's been in for his whole career, to find out that that's not a business that I would necessarily wanted to be in. So I
Sure.
eventually wanted to get back into the international trading business. And so while I was in California, I had to look at obviously all of the companies in California and in Los Angeles, and came across Alpert and Alpert, which is one of the biggest companies in LA, especially for the non-ferrous. So I started at Alpert. They brought me on to expand their trading into Latin America. So it was kind of a natural fit for me. And they were great about opening up opportunities for me to go explore throughout South America, Central America, and it opened up great business opportunities. It was fantastic. So for many years, I developed a lot of relationships with suppliers throughout Latin America and then expanded into the Middle East and then into Africa. And it was fantastic. I mean, I don't have to tell people in the business, but, from 2002 or 2004 to 2008, it's the biggest bull market we've ever
Good
seen.
times,
So,
man.
it was
Yeah,
hard not to necessarily make money in that time
yeah.
because it just seemed like prices kind of went up every day. So it was a teaser in a way because it just seemed like business was so easy back then because also things were happening that hadn't happened before. I mean, you look at the ferrous prices when they started jumping up so much that all of a sudden you could put steel scrap in containers, and the margins for that at the time, we were making as much as the aluminums, $50 a ton, and it was just incredible.
Wow.
And you're talking about thousands of tons per month from small countries like Panama or from Nicaragua or from El Salvador, and it was just an amazing time. So
Mm, mm.
uh, after a couple years trading at Alpert, I was promoted to the director of purchasing, and I oversaw all of the buyers. And the way we had it structured was we had traders that were dedicated to certain parts of whether it was the United States or certain parts of the world. And then eventually I became the commercial director, where I oversaw all the commercial activities for Alpert, which was their big trading business and their scrap facilities in California and their overseas offices. So basically in the 2010s, we grew that business to a very significant player in the industry. So then came around 2018. I just saw it as a time and an opportunity to kind of go on my own. So what I did was I talked to Michael Deal, who is my partner. He oversaw the copper business at Alpert, and we just thought it was a good opportunity or good timing to go explore the things. So we reached out to Cormet in New York, and the reason we reached out to them was because Cormet is an interesting story. They are a group of traders that came from Philip Brothers in the 80s, early 90s, and started their own business. And they fly under the radar. They are very smart. And I would come across their name in the most random places. So, I would hear their name in places like Morocco or Saudi Arabia. and through the most random small suppliers that didn't have necessarily an international reach. So I was always kind of curious how this company in New York City, that wasn't one of the big trading companies or big names, was able to kind of get into these small niche markets. And we knew that that's the kind of business that we need to be with, because they do a lot of the same things that we were doing. There was a lot of foreign purchasing from the developing world, and where the risks are a little bit higher, but we knew that they understood what it took to do the business there, with the payment terms that are required, with the risks that are required in some of these places. So we felt it was a good fit. And when we reached out to them, you couldn't pick two more different set of people when you talk about Michael and I in Los Angeles, and these three gentlemen, in their 60s that are looking more towards retirement in New York. But yet, when we start talking business and talking scrap, it's just amazing how we're dealing with the same stuff, which was kind of funny, because when we went to interview with the bank, they were kind of seeing the same thing, where, wait, how is it that, you two Catholic boys in Los Angeles and these three, older generation Jewish traders, how is it possible that this is a good match? But, at the end of the day, when it comes to talking about scrap, it was literally like the perfect marriage, and it was a perfect setup. So it really has been a great experience working with these guys. They have many years of experience, and they're just really great guys. And it's been a pleasure. And so naturally over time, the idea is that these guys will retire, and Michael and I, and we brought another gentleman from Alpert, Andy Davis, who oversaw the nickel and high temp business there. And he's basically become an expert in that field. And he's now working with us out of Houston, and he's growing that business in a great way. So that's a long story,
awesome.
but that's kind of,
but it's good to kind of get the background, understand the experience that you have, because when we delve into some of these questions, it's nice to know that we're getting it from somebody who's been through quite a lot, especially working in the regions that you have, right? It's quite easy to just go, I mean, it's not easy, but let's say for the bigger name traders to hit up your regular supply. We can name a whole heap of them in the States and in different countries. Easy to do business with them. They're going to supply the right quality. Right. The payment terms will be okay. Everything will be fine. When you start going into those regions, you must have had some tough experiences. So maybe you can talk me through what's been a really tough experience for you, and what you learned from that.
So, yeah, I mean, when you're traveling to places, countries in Central South America or in Africa or in the Middle East, they each have their own dynamics and their own risks. But, what I love about the business, and what's attracted me to stay in it and to grow in it, is the people that you meet and the characters that you meet. And, when you're talking about the scrap industry, it's down to the pure people of whatever country it is. You get to know the culture through the scrap, suppliers. It's amazing, because it's not the most sophisticated industry. And there are parts where, there's a lot of growth and stuff to be done. But the people that you meet, they're genuine people. And that's part of the one that I love. Now, at the same time, our business, unfortunately, when you're talking about a commodity that can have various values, from even within, say, copper, the values can be dramatic in the different products that we trade. There is a risk of attracting, how do I say this in the right way? When you're looking at an exporting company that's bringing in dollars, there's a lot of potential risks in people that want to associate with you to basically, wash their money and things like that. So, we've had issues where we have to make sure that we're not dealing with people that are laundering money for cartels or whatever it is. So it is important to go down and meet with the people and see that they're for real and they're investing money into the industry. They've got equipment and they're dedicated to the industry. Now, with that said, you can't always get it right. So, we've had some instances where they didn't end up being the most legitimate operators. And luckily, my experiences and losses haven't been over the top. But yes, I've come across people, and those are the situations that you never really forget. So you really want to learn who you're doing business with and make sure that they're legitimate. And obviously the people that have been in the business for a long time and multi-generation business, those are the ones that are dedicated to the business, and they're not going to, steer off to these sketchier types of operations.
Yeah. So, I mean, in the regions you're talking about, it's a no-brainer that you have to go and visit,
Yeah,
right? I mean, I can only imagine if you get there and they don't have any equipment,
right,
but they're offering you a whole lot of material, shredded material,
right.
even as an example. That's something that you would identify very quickly on. Have you ever had an experience where you've gone there and gone, I don't think we should be doing business with these
Oh,
guys, or is it like a 99% hit rate that when you go there, you
no.
do business
So,
with it?
before you could really find all these companies that are exporters, yes, I had to look in the yellow pages and reach out to departments of commerce to see export records and to see at least some names. But it's amazing, when you're on the ground in a specific market, how much people talk, and you can quickly find out who the legitimate players are. So yeah, it's critical to be there on the ground and learn from these people, and within a couple of days you're going to know who the players are.
Yeah.
Now it doesn't necessarily mean that they're running a legitimate operation, but you know who the big movers are that are loading containers and whatever else. But as far as equipment, yes, people that have equipment, that's a big telling story. But like, in Africa, I mean, you would know the farther you go north, it's just four walls. It's not really, there's not equipment necessarily. They're loading containers loose, manually.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
um, those are the ones that you have to be a little bit more careful on because they can shut down their operation in 2 seconds. But, some of these countries, that's just the way it is. They don't necessarily look to, at least not at this point, package their material. They're just loading containers loose, whether it's with copper, whether it's with different aluminum products, stainless, whatever else. So, but you do want to sit
I
with
get,
them and you want to look at them in the eye and you want to, see if they're for real. And I would say most of the cases, they are interested in the business. They're interested in growing the business and they want to learn from you. And that's where you kind of start to build a relationship with these people. And over time, you develop a good relationship.
have you ever had to make a really tough decision in that regard? I mean, it might not be in that specific, but think of a tough decision you've had to make in your career, and what sort of learnings came out of that.
Yeah, the tough decisions is really the patience of limiting the risk and not growing too fast because, you could easily, if you buy one container from a guy that you just met, you know, you're willing to take a chance, but you have to have the patience of making sure everything goes right. Because it's very easy to say, well, I bought this and made a lot of money. Okay, I'm going to buy another one. I'm going to buy another one. I'm going to buy another one. We're talking about from the moment you buy it to the moment it's received in China, Korea, and Japan, you're talking about 90 days. So the discipline of going through a trial process and waiting for the containers to arrive, making sure everything was done correctly, you have to be patient because that can snowball into a serious problem if you've got a lot of money out there and containers on the water. And probably the biggest fear is, the time of when you do the deal to sending the guy money and then, hope to God that the containers that arrive are exactly what you bought. And that is a big concern, at the beginning. But it's a calculated risk. You have to basically go with your gut. You have to take somewhat of a risk. But yeah, there are challenges, and we've come across times where it didn't work out well.
Jim, it's quite funny. I mean, I'm sure you remember, as I do, being a younger trader, right? That excitement of landing a new customer, doing that first container, you get the photos, everything's gone really well. Absolutely, you are eager to go buy another 20
Right,
containers from him the next day. The material hasn't even
right,
landed in the market yet. It hasn't got to Korea, Japan, wherever it's going to, China. It hasn't got it. But you're adamant because those pictures were so good. And maybe you had a phone call with the guy and he said, yeah, the material was beautiful. You now think you're good to go. And, your team around you has said how excellent it is that you opened up this new market. And it's about holding that back,
yeah,
right? And we learn over time that that's the decisions you've had to make, right? Difficult times, put you in a position to make these
right,
decisions, and you learn. And sometimes really learning costs you a
yeah.
lot. but it's the best lessons you can
No,
learn.
for sure. And that's why over time, when you're having a conversation with suppliers and new suppliers, and you start to have a dialogue about the business, about the history, about everything else, you start to, if you feel like you're speaking the same language, that they've been around long enough. And, one of the things I try to do is understand who they're currently doing business with, because if they're
Mm.
currently selling to a trading company that I'm familiar with, then obviously that raises it to a level of feeling comfortable with it. Now, you obviously want to try to find one that nobody really knows, but at the same time, that's very rare.
Yeah, there's a reason for that.
Exactly.
So then there's a reason why nobody's trading with him. But even Jim, even when you get told that they're dealing with X trader and they're a reputable trader, and you go, you can't phone that trader to confirm it.
No.
So how many times did I get told, "Oh, this is who I currently sell to," or whatever it might be, and you don't actually know that that's true or not.
Right. But, yes, correct. I mean, there's some traders that'll share everything with you. They'll share prices, they'll share, who they're selling to
Mm.
at what and whatever else. Which those are the kind of guys that I don't necessarily love, because they're going to do the same thing with your information. So
They're doing the same.
if they can talk shop in the sense of, knowing what birch clip is and knowing what candy berry is and knowing that they're actually in the industry, that's very helpful, because there are other people that have scammed, big numbers out there, especially in the last couple of years, where there's a lot of containers of copper that arrived, with sand and
Not
mud.
of
And yeah,
copper.
I mean, that's a horror story. And that's where even your competitor, you don't want to do that with your competitor, because, it's just really bad for the industry. It's not good for
Mm.
anyone. Because when there's big fraud in our industry, it's not just the traders, it's not the consumers, it's the banks, it's everybody gets a little bit nervous, and it just really
The
isn't good.
insurance.
Um,
Yeah, absolutely.
so yeah, there's a lot of moving parts, but it's just part of the business, and it's part of the excitement.
It comes with the territory, but you play in a specific territory, which it comes in a lot greater amounts. The rest.
Yes,
So
correct.
yeah,
Yes,
you're probably more experienced in some of that than most people I speak to.
yes, and there
And
are times where look, nobody likes to lose money. When it's fraud, it's very different. And luckily, knock on wood, I've had very limited of people just trying to like screw me in it by taking
mm,
advantage of the situation. But again, if somebody's going to put dirt and mud into their scrap, or send concrete, that's a very, very, first of all, it's people that haven't had a lot of history in the business. Because if you've had history in the business, you can only really get away with that once. So now,
yeah,
and that
exactly right.
once, you really have a period of what, 45 days to take advantage as much of people as possible, because news travels very fast. Like if a container arrives in Busan with sand, it's a matter of days before everybody in the business, at least in the trading business,
Yeah,
understands it, because news travels very fast, and when you've got a bad player out there, I don't think you'd want anybody to get necessarily hurt. So
I arrived in Kolkata for the MRAI a few months ago, and I received a text message from somebody I didn't even know at the time, telling me about a bad experience he had had purchasing some material. And that text message had gone out to everybody
right,
because he wanted to make sure that everybody was aware that this party was a bad party. I found that very interesting. It wasn't something that I'd received before. I've received phone calls
right,
and whatever. I hadn't seen a text message blasted out to everybody
right,
that was possibly listening. Um, and and we're not held accountable, right?
right,
So the industry has no form of holding each other
right.
accountable. There's a lot to be said for the ability to do that. And if you're able to send out text messages or something like that, that's great. But that has to be brought into this industry.
Yeah, I mean, you obviously have to take certain disputes, with a grain of salt, because a disgruntled buyer can easily just ruin somebody's reputation if they didn't get a good deal.
Absolutely.
So, but yes, no,
Yeah.
when it comes to fraud, for sure. I mean, now the people change names, companies change names, so there is that aspect of it. But yes, it comes down to a specific person, and that's why it's like, I don't really care about the company's name that committed the fraud. It's really who is the person that we're talking about, because that's the
Mm,
guy that has to appear at some point, whether it's a new company or whatever else. And, we've had that experience in North Africa, where there was a bad player that screwed a lot of the traders. And that guy is, he's not around in the business anymore, but he was in the business for a period of time. And he ended up, I don't know what happened, whether it was a desperation or whatever else, but he basically ended up putting a lot of dirt into the coppers. and he screwed a lot of the trading companies, including ourselves. But again, it was the kiss of death for him. I mean, he can't come back. You know what I mean?
That's a really good point, though, Jim. It's not the company, because it's much too easy to
Yes.
close a company and start another
Yes.
one. It's actually the individuals that you need to
Yes.
do most of your due diligence on. When you're buying from somebody or selling to somebody, find out who that individual is, find out about that person's reputation, more than just finding out about the company.
For sure. 100%. And that's why it is important to go and meet these people and sit with them and look at them in the eye, because, the amount of money that goes around, especially on the non-ferrous side and the copper side, you're talking about millions and millions of dollars that you're taking risks on that, now at the same time, that is also a barrier of entry for a lot of people. So, there is opportunity there too, because a lot of people aren't necessarily willing to take that risk. But yeah, no, it can be scary.
So, what should the suppliers or the metal recyclers out there be looking out for when they're dealing with a new buyer? So, you're obviously a new buyer, then there's the end users, etc. as well. If somebody's looking to grow their seller base, what should they be focusing on? What should they be looking for? It's obviously something that you try to achieve as well. So, what really is that?
I think the trust is 100% the main factor. And you want to make sure that whether the trader that you're dealing with is financially strong, has good markets, and has been around long enough to handle certain situations. When it comes to copper, for example, just look at the LME over the last 4 weeks. When you're talking about an LME that jumps $500 a ton in a short period of time, you're bringing in a whole level of other somewhat potential headaches, whether it's margin calls, whether it's, pricing options that, you want to make sure that the trading partner that you're dealing with can handle all these types of situations, because, there are traders that may not be financially strong. And in a situation like this, where they're faced with margin calls, they might not have any money to pay you immediately. So, you want to do your homework and make sure that they are legitimate trading partners and they're financially strong, and that they can basically stand up to their commitments.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think somebody mentioned the other day that you must always be aware that the buyer's risk is passed on to you. So if the trader has margin call risk, depending on what size book they're carrying, all that sort of stuff, you need to be aware of that. And actually, the topic we were talking about was, and it was with Bob Stein. The conversation was around: do you commit everything to one buyer, build that relationship with that one buyer, or should you be spreading it out? And the idea was, make sure you spread it out as much as possible, because their risk is your risk. And if everything's going to one party, of course, you, Jim, would like people to supply you 100% of their material, right. But at the same time, we have to consider risk, right?
So yes, 100%. Now, with that said, there are relationships. When you become friends with your trading partners, you want to do whatever you can to help them. So there is something to be said about the long-term relationships that you have, that you favor. Like, for example, for me, my closest relationships, I almost have a vested interest in their business. So I need them to do well, and I need them to be competitive in their market. So I can't necessarily take advantage of the situation, because if he can't buy the metal, then he's going to suffer, and indirectly I will suffer. So I do try to help them out, whether it's, understanding their business, giving them advice on whether I've seen certain ideas or other things that other people are doing, whether it's upgrading material, whether it's taking certain hedging risks, or offering other types of risk management tools. I feel like helping them out is going to help me out in the long run. So building the trust where they can come to me and with ideas or with questions, I think that's the big part of it. So yeah, that's another part, is that, for example, for us, we always want to stay on top of all of these potential services that we can provide, because if they don't see value in a trader, then how long can you really last? So we do want to look for suppliers that prefer to do business with traders for whatever reason. They don't want to deal with the receivable risk. They want quick pay. I mean, payment is a big part of it. So, the traders aren't making, for the most part, they're not making a killing. So, when your business is more dealing with your competitors in Bogota, or, you're dealing with trying to buy source scrap in wherever it is. And you don't want to necessarily deal with having to open LCs, happen to worry about, is this buyer going to pay me? The containers are already arrived. There is value to that. I think, there are a lot of suppliers that do respect it and do want to prefer to do it. Now, there are a lot of suppliers that ultimately it's all about price and they want to go straight as much as possible. And those are the kind of guys that, sure, you can entertain them, but that's not where you're really going to grow your business. So,
there's a reason why there's traders, agents, and end users, right? I do believe that each party plays their part. Every different metal recycler has different requirements when it comes to sales. And as you say, they might just want something as simple as they just want to sell FAS,
right.
and the end users are not doing the shipping, right? Therefore, the trader plays a role. There's so many places. So totally agree with you that it's probably best for you to focus most of your time in the guys that are selling to traders, not the ones trying to convince them, because they've already got a shipping team and they're used to selling to the end users.
Yeah, and there's only so much time you have in the day. So why are you going to waste your
Exactly.
energy on trying to buy from Sims, or OmniSource? Or, even though, the volumes are massive and the opportunities are, you look at them and you're like, oh my God, there's so much scrap here. Like, I could have a field day here, but they don't need necessarily somebody like. Now, there are some big companies that aren't willing to take some of the risks, whether the receivable risk and whatever else, where they may focus on running it through a trader, but they're going to squeeze you pretty tight. I mean, it's very hard to make a lot of money on that type of business.
Yeah. You spoke about payments being really important, especially that's a real big advantage of selling through a trader. When you're doing new business, what's your usual way of getting in there? What's your usual payment terms that you might provide?
Well, unfortunately, it's not always up to me. The market kind of sets that. So, if there's a supplier that I'm trying to court and trying to do business with that seems legitimate, and he's already selling to trading companies that are going to pay him cash upon, whether it's upon sailing or cash upon loading of containers, it's really hard to not have to match those terms. So, ideally, sure, I'll pay you once it's received and verified, but that's impossible. So, I almost have to get to what the market is already been set. So, if I try to do an 80-20, and he says, no, I sell 100% cash against copy of documents, then you pretty much have no choice. Because, especially if you're trying to break in, you could either break in with a massive price, which then you're just going to do a trial without making any money, or you have to basically take his word that he is selling it. And you also understand what the payment terms are in that specific market pretty quick. What the traders, what your competitors are, how they pay. There are some trading companies that won't pay anything until they get the actual bill of lading, or there are other traders that basically will give advances. So you have to kind of maneuver within, what you can learn. But, unfortunately, that's where the risks come into play, and you will eventually have to pay them up front.
How do you handle advances in certain regions you're in? I mean, that when you talk about risk, you want to pay a deposit in some of those countries. Rather you than me.
So I mean, that's when you talk about some of the experiences that I've had. The not so good experiences mainly come in because I've either paid them in advance or it really comes down to the market. So, for example, in some of the countries in Africa, like Western Africa, whether it's Togo, Benin, Ghana, Senegal, those countries, we try to limit the exposure of paying in advance, because not necessarily because we don't trust the supplier, but it's more of there's risks with the country risk or the shipping line risk. When you've got cases like what happened with the Red Sea, or what's happening with certain times of the year where, the fruit season in Central America or the fruit season in Central Africa, where the last priority for the shipping line is scrap. So, they're going to put anything else on those vessels but scrap. So paying somebody in advance and having the container sit at the port for a month it's expensive. So there are certain countries where it's not that we don't trust the supplier, it's more we don't trust the country, or we don't trust the logistics.
I mean, I was from South Africa, right? Born and bred. And in our company in South Africa, or sub-Saharan Africa, we didn't buy metal from anything north of the Sahara.
Right.
So it was pretty much we could manage everything south of there. So it was closer to where we were, and we had multiple yards in the areas. So we could go and visit and make sure that the material was being loaded. Anything north of that, we just didn't take the risk for reasons that you're saying, right? I mean, a lot of it is out of the actual recyclers' hands. I mean, government change rules in those countries, on a day-to-day basis.
Right. And that's
tomorrow they're exporting, next day they're not.
And that's that's been an issue for me over time. I mean, for me, for example, Venezuela, when I first started, Venezuela was my biggest market. The quality of the scrap there was incredible. The suppliers were super nice people, great trading partners. But all of a sudden, Hugo Chavez comes in and he puts a ban on exports of scrap. And then it becomes like a black market, and you don't really want to get into this aspect of it. And this is one of the, kind of the big concerns that I have, about the business is as scrap values, especially copper, when, if copper goes to 15,000 and you're seeing the amount of money that's leaving these third world countries, the government's not, unaware of it. So when they see all this high value leaving the country, they start to say, hey, wait a second, what's going on here?
We want a piece of this.
We're getting, people are taking advantage of our raw materials. They start to look at that aspect of it, and then they start to put in, whether it's duties, whether it's bans on scrap. But what's unfortunate is that scrap will always find its way. So when they put a ban on the exports of scrap in Venezuela, all of a sudden our volumes from Colombia tripled, or Algeria to Morocco, or Nigeria to Benin and Togo, and I mean, it really is unfortunate when these governments put in these restrictions. It just creates, a smuggling operation, or it creates corruption, and it is a concern. So, and that's one of the concerns I do have, moving forward, because we are starting to see more and more of that in the last, even in the last year. You're seeing new regulations come into play in Saudi Arabia, in the UAE, and Morocco. Now you can't export scrap. It's happening in Togo. It's just, it's becoming an issue. Sure, if you're a guy that's opening a smelter in those countries, sure, but really all you're doing is melting the scrap into a form that's going to be sent to somewhere where it's just going to be melted again, because you can't, stainless, nobody's going to build a stainless mill in a small country in Africa to make a finished product. Even copper, for example, when they start banning copper, all they're doing is melting it into an ingot form and then shipping it to Ningbo to be remelted there. So really, if anything, you should just tax it, at a level, but don't create an environment where you're just going to change the form into something that's going to basically be shipped to the same consumer, and all you're doing is wasting energy. I mean, you're going to have to now melt it twice.
I mean, I totally agree. We've spoken at the BIR about this many times, members of Israel, but it's a big thing in Europe at the moment, obviously, and these discussions are being had every day. And the problem is, I think a lot of it's got to do with how our industry is perceived.
Right.
That we're a waste industry, and we need to fix that as much as possible. Speak as much as we can to the decision makers and explain to them what we're actually doing, because I think really they just don't get it.
Right.
And it's much easier for the large corporates of the world, being the mills, etc., that can go and lobby the government and say, well, you should keep all our raw materials in the country. Our resources should stay in the country. And all they're actually doing is just, opening their margins. They're just going to make more profit. That's their only plan. And the governments don't see that around the world. And yeah, I mean,
but they're also creating a smuggling operation, because if they get too,
completely.
Scrap will find its way, especially if they try to put barriers into where it's just economical to just pay some guy, at the border to just let your truck cross into wherever you want to go. They will find its way. I mean, the values, especially, with copper, it's hard to stop that.
Yeah, well, I guess, if you're a metal recycler, a decent sized metal recycler, you just set up your own furnace and you change its form and you melt it into a block or an ingot, and you just have to export like it. It's just going to cost you a little bit more money, but as you say, it'll find its way. So is that, if we were to speak about where you think this industry is going in the next 10 years, what it might look like, what do you think are the big changes that we can see?
When you look at the corporations now in the direction that the companies like Apple and Tesla and the automotive industry, there is a lot of sustainability. There's a lot of knowing the full supply chain. One of the concerns I have is we are going down a direction of, companies that are buying certain products, they want to know exactly where it came from in every aspect of it, whether it's because they don't want to participate in buying, illegal material. It's, you know what I mean? Like they want to identify exactly where, because they want
absolutely.
it's a PR aspect of it that they have to
cradle to grave.
Exactly. So
yeah, absolutely.
We've actually even been approached by consumers where, they're saying, hey, we don't want any conflict zone material. Okay. And we're like, conflict zone material? What does that mean? Because they've had a war in the past, or because they're in a war now, or how do you define that? But, at the end of the day.
And what happens if it was previously recycled? Right? What happens if you've got recycled material that's already been recycled and it's circular, right? It's just carrying on.
So my concern is talking to a big consumer in Europe where they were talking about how to be able to sell to the automotive industry, whether it was Audi or BMW or whoever, they had to verify the full aspect of where the material is coming from. Are we going down a path where you're going to create, cathode and finished product for fully approved material and non-approved material? Because now you're talking about creating two parallel markets where, hey, your scrap is coming from a factory that the origin of it is now going to be significantly higher than the scrap from the post-consumer scrap. So, are we creating two different products that are going to be, moving side by side? And how do you avoid people not cheating that system? Here in California, we have a bottle bill here where, UBC, there's the redemption program, but, from time to time, you have cheaters that are bringing cans in from Arizona or Nevada to take advantage of the 5 cents a pound or 5 cents a can redemption program. So, when you're creating these situations where there's two types of scrap and it's really the same scrap, there is concern of like, how do you work under that environment? And how do you not just say, hey, wait a second, that looks exactly like that? Like, how are they going to know?
Yeah, how do you identify that? That's it's going to be very, very difficult,
impossible
to monitor.
Well, unless it's a full, it's a full, closed loop system where, okay, the industrial scrap that's coming from the plant is actually melted into that product, or you become a strictly industrial consumer. You could maybe do it through an auditing process where you're qualified. But I mean, that could be.
But that'll be set commodity, which would have to flow directly back into the mill. It wouldn't be able to touch other people's. And once it hits a metal recycler's yard,
then it's cross-contamination.
Contaminated, but absolutely. Yeah. And then all of a sudden you put 50% of your non-approved material in your approved material, because you're getting a premium. I mean, metal recyclers are going to find a way to maximize this opportunity. So,
and those type of situations, it's also just really, it's only going to make the consumer's product so much more expensive, because the products that are going to be made in China that don't have to live by these rules, it just doesn't make a lot of sense that we're going down this path. But I'm fearful that that's kind of the direction, just because it's more really coming from the top down, where management is pushing this PR aspect, which some people may pay a premium for knowing that, hey, I know exactly where that came from, but at the end of the day, give me a break. Like, that's
just going to make your costs go up in general, right? So now cars are going to be more expensive, or anything else that you're buying. So, and I think, just to be clear, before we finish off, we're all for sustainability, but it's the way we execute that is really important.
Right. 100%. No, don't get me wrong. I live in California. This is the most liberal, most, so I am definitely in favor of being conscious and that's why, even in the recycling business, you do want to follow rules, whether it's, if you're opening a scrapyard in California, you want to make it an even playing field, which means you have to take care of the rainwaters. You have to do all of the things that are required. You want to do things the right way, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, let's finish off with some simple questions we ask everybody that comes on Born Scrappy. So Firstly, who would you like to see next on Born Scrappy? I think you were mentioned by Javed Ahmed from Al-Qaeda. So who are you going to pass it on to?
Man,
Who would you like to see next?
good question. You know, one part of the industry that I think is also going to kind of be changing over time is these family companies that have been in the business for multi-generations, and they own, these incredible properties in downtown areas of America's biggest cities. Real estate is becoming a big play in the business, where some people are now looking to just get out of the business and develop the land and whatever else. A guy that's I think very interesting because he's done a great job in building a great brand is Edward Kangater. I don't know if you've ever met him from Cass. Uh,
Yeah, he's
I've
great.
seen you've done John Sacco and George Adams, and he's another one that I think is worth learning because I think he's done a great job, and he's probably in an area where a lot of what he's going through, I think is going to happen across the country. And he's a super smart guy. He's built a good brand. It's worth discussing.
If I can, this is being recorded 2 weeks before Isri. It'll come out probably around the same time as Isri. I am expecting, and discussions are underway at the moment for John, George, and Edward to be on the stage with me as a panel to talk on Born Scrappy. So I think that team, that group would be
travel
amazing to get
together to
together.
the BIR. So if you don't see him there, you can
Exactly.
see him in Copenhagen too.
Yeah, exactly. But we're on the stage at Isri, so to get the three of them up there and tell some stories, I think they're good pals as well.
No,
So
they definitely
that'll
are.
be quite good. Before we finish off, do you have a favorite TV series or movie?
I'm watching a really good show right now that's on Netflix called The Gentleman. It's a funny show. It's a dark comedy. It's a cross between Succession and Breaking Bad. So which are two
Cool.
shows that I actually like too. But it's a good one, and I
Yeah.
think it's worth
Cool.
watching.
Have you got a favorite book?
I recently read The World for Sale, which is
Brilliant.
very appropriate to our industry, and it's gives a lot of background and history from a lot of these big trading companies, and I really enjoyed that. Another one that's also good with our industry is King of Oil, which is the story of Mark Rich, which is it's a really good book and a really good read.
It got mentioned last week by Jay Rabinowitz, and I'm actually starting to read it now. So
Which one? King of
I've read
Oil?
The World for Sale, King of Oil. Yeah, I read The World for Sale, loved
Yeah,
it. I haven't read King
King of Oil is
King
great.
of Oil yet.
King
So
of Oil is great.
yeah, Mark Rich. Favorite place to visit?
Man, that one's tough because I do like a lot of different places. If it's beach, probably Los Cabos, Mexico, because it's close and we go there all the time. Cities, love London, love Tokyo. And as far as adventurous, more outdoorsy stuff, love Colorado. Love New Zealand. New Zealand's a fantastic place. So
Yeah, New Zealand's great,
yeah.
right? Last thing, have you got a favorite quote?
Well, quotes that we use all the time, and this goes back to my earlier saying, if you don't go, you don't know, which is very, very true in our business.
Very good.
And, nobody ever went broke taking a profit. We quote that kind of sarcastically all the time, but there is truth to that. And I tell my suppliers that all the time, because if they're going to speculate, if you own the material and you can make a profit, then go for it.
Love it. Jim, it's been awesome, man. I appreciate you coming on Born Scrappy.
Thanks.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Cheers, Jim.